I'm the Regional Interagency Council Program Administrator, and my co-host is Lee Taylor. Lee is the State Interagency Council Program Administrator, and we both work at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities. So we want to thank you for joining us today. Today's REACT Learning Series session is titled Building Communication and Collaboration Among Agencies. This session has been highly requested in various meetings and spaces over the past few years by REACT leaders and system of care partners. So we're really excited to be able to bring this session to you this morning, and we're very appreciative of everyone that made this happen, including our facilitator and our panelists that have joined us today. So this session is panel style. It includes representation from system of care leaders at both the state and the regional levels, as well as system of care stakeholders at both the state and regional level. Our facilitator today is Kelly Dorman, and I'll turn it over to her in just a second to let her introduce herself. But before I do, I just wanted to take a few seconds to go over some housekeeping items. If you haven't already, please mute your mics. We have time carved out at the very end for questions and answers. Also, Lee and I will be monitoring the chat along the way as well. So if you want to put some questions in there, we'll take care of that. This workshop will be recorded and posted on our REACT YouTube channel, and we'll put that link in the chat box a little bit later on. We'll also have a session evaluation posted in the chat box towards the end of the session. So please take a moment to complete that. And as always, if you need a certificate of attendance, we can get that to you as well. You can email me and I'll put my email in the chat box as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kelly Dorman.
Thanks, Vanessa. I'm Kelly, and I know many of you because I had a 28-year career between the Department of Community-Based Services and the Department for Behavioral Health, Development and Intellectual Disabilities, and I'm currently representing myself as I returned to retirement last month. So Vanessa and Lee reached out and asked me if I would facilitate, and because I have had a very long-standing passion for the system of care and the very important collaboration that people do within their agencies and within our communities, then I very happily accepted, and then woke up this morning and thought, why did I do that? But, you know, here I am, because we just persevere in this world. I want to talk about, we talk a lot about system of care, and Vanessa explained that we struggle to understand what that actually means and where our roles as individuals, as community members, as representative of our agencies, where do we fit into that? Like, what can we do and what do we do that factors into that system of care? I really focus on connections being a key component of that system of care. And we want you to understand in attending this and thinking through kind of your role and where your passions are, how you can best implement yourself into that system of care and support families and children. I do this because I care, and you're here because you care. And that is why we continue to do what we do. I know life can be incredibly overwhelming. I know our agencies keep us super busy. I know life keeps us super busy, but it's really important to stop sometimes and think through, where are you in the system of care and what are you doing to support families and children as they work through their behavioral health and mental health issues. So we're going to talk about building communication and collaboration among agencies for the overall purpose of supporting those families. Vanessa asked me to kind of talk about some things that I've seen work really well in the system of care, because I was happy to be around for a couple different decades. I got to see some really, really great things happen. I used to be a REACT chair for a regional interagency council chair for Salt River Trail back in the day before Michelle took it over. And so I got to see, we were all struggling. There was a certain issue, and I can't remember the exact issue as it was at the time, but we all had this understanding of something that impacted the Medicaid services for some of our families. And it was just one of those things that had been passed down through the years that everybody just, this is what the way it is. But we didn't actually understand. We hadn't read Medicaid policy. We didn't read Medicaid regs. It was just one of those things that we just knew that's the way it was. But as a REACT, we sent it up to the system, to the state interagency council. And the Medicaid commissioner was like, no, that's actually not correct. Here's what the policy says. Here's the wording you need to help your families. And it was just one of those examples of that infrastructure where it's like our boots on the ground at the regional level. We were like, oh, this is what we've always done. And so Kentucky's unique with that infrastructure. And this poster that we're showing you that was developed with Kentucky Lead, which is people with lived experience, really kind of designates the idea of the system of care. And it explains what it is. Vanessa did send it out with the email, so you all can read it in more detail, and it has the guiding principles. And I wanted to talk about too that one of the examples that I got to see too with the infrastructure is I was around when the FAIR teams first started, and I cannot for the life of me remember what FAIR stands for, so somebody else can drop that in the chat. But I wanted to give you a real life example, because one of the things that I like to do is we talk a lot about, Vanessa, can you stop sharing now if you don't care, please? I like to see people. It helps me feel more connected. And then I don't ramble quite as much. But anyway, so because I was around when FAIR team started, I want to give you an example of sometimes we talk a lot of things about systems and we get kind of focused on some of the theoretical ideas, the things that happen up here, and we don't always know how that happens and impacts things directly. So when the FAIR teams first started, as you all know, those are juveniles and youth who've struggled with something to do with the legal system. And so they bring a collaboration of several different agencies, DCS, Administrative Office of the Courts, and they were staffing, I was in a county, and they were staffing 2 different families. And so these kids both had made some poor decisions, and they'd gotten involved with the justice system. And the first individual was a 14-year-old who struggled to go to school. And social services happened to know that the family dynamic, they knew that that mom was doing everything she could do. They knew that the family was just struggling and what was happening with that family. And then there was another situation with a 17-year-old, and he had a 2-parent family, and he had just made a ton of poor decisions. He'd been offered lots of services. He'd been taken to therapy, and he just wasn't making good choices. He wasn't engaging in the process. And so because the agencies collaborated, they communicated about what they knew about these kids and their families, they had 2 very different responses to those kids. And that is a very hands-on example about how that collaboration and all of us working together as a system and as members of that system can impact those families. So the 14-year-old whose family really was doing everything they could possibly do, got some additional supportive services and didn't have to be bumped up through the legal system. The 17-year-old who'd been given multiple opportunities and just continued to make poor choices went to court. And that was because those people sat around the table and brought what they knew about those families to be helpful and to be effective. So I wanted to give that as an example, because we do sometimes talk, in my opinion, a little too theoretical. And by the way, for those who don't know me, I'm really enjoying the fact that I'm not an agency representative and I can just tell you what I think. That's a lot of fun for me, because sometimes in politics you have to kind of couch things a little bit, and I don't do that anymore. But anyway, so as Vanessa said, this topic has been requested in many different areas. And I've talked to a lot of people through the years and a lot of frontline staff, and people want to be helpful. They want to do the right thing. They just may not understand how they can really impact things and where their role is. And I'm going to encourage everybody, and I've always encouraged everybody, it's one thing to attend meetings, but we want your voice at those meetings. We don't want you to just be there to take up space, because everybody's opinion matters and we can all learn from each other, and everybody has a great perspective, be it from their own experience, their own work responsibilities, whatever it may be. But we want your voice. We want to learn from everything you've experienced and everything you've known to build a better system, because we know there are a lot of people out there struggling every day, all day long. Some days those people are us. We just know that. We work together and we have those communications and we have those connections, and we look at what the system's trying to do, we can find our place in that. We talk a lot about, we want you to figure out your buy-in and where that has to be, but we need you to own that for yourself, figure out where is your passion, what do you want to bring to the table, where do you want to help, and then bring your voice and make it happen. And the system of care in Kentucky's infrastructure absolutely can do that. And I know Beth's going to talk more about our infrastructure, but I can tell you I went to a meeting, I guess this year, with other states, and they just marvel at what Kentucky's doing. And you and I both know Kentucky, when it comes to the stats, are not always ranking at the highest. But when it comes to what we do for families and children and what we do to support people with struggling with mental health issues is phenomenal. And that is, in my opinion, why we've been awarded 6 system of care grants by the federal government. I talked to a state who'd had one, and we've had 6. It's because that infrastructure is there and people can go into a regional interaction council in Shelbyville, where I happen to live, have a conversation, meet with people, talk about things that they know families are struggling with. And that gets documented and it gets sent up. And then the state interagency council collaborates and governs everything that they're trying to do. So the people that sit in the commissioner's office know what's happening in the counties. And that's huge. We know that's huge. And I know other areas that don't get to do that. So I think there's a lot of important things happening. I think there's a lot of good things happening. I know, even though I'm currently retired, that there's always room for improvement. So we want to take this opportunity to hear from the people who've been working and figure out some ways that we can improve things. I'm like Vanessa, if you think of things, no, Beth, I'm not letting you off hook that easy. If you think of things, ideas, examples, because I do think part of the reason that Lee and Vanessa asked me to do this is because I don't always do the political speak very well. And I make it about what the families and children need. I'm a parent of children with special needs. I've been in those waiting rooms. I've been in the psych hospitals. I've walked that path. Thankfully, they're all adults. We're great. We're good. We're proven. But I want people to know that, like, we know there's room for improvement, but we want people to, like, bring their ideas. We want people to bring their examples because it helps other people make connections and it helps other people learn. So I'm going to jump into our questions, and Beth, you're up first. All right. So you've been part of Kentucky's system of care infrastructure development since the beginning. Not that I'm calling you old. I would never do that because we're the same age and we're just very experienced. That's way different. And you've presented at both state and national levels and happen to have been named a national system of care innovator because she is that effective. And she go to a meeting with her with other states and, like, she's the woman. It's really impressive. So everybody needs to do a little fangirl for Beth Jordan, and she's going to kill me, but I don't work for you anymore, so it's okay. Can you talk about the key elements that must be present to support an effective regional system of care?
Sure. And I did take notes because as I referenced earlier, I do tend to get a little bit distracted. So I'm going to try and stay on task. But I think our Kentucky system of care provides a really strong mechanism where there's shared accountability and responsibility for system reforms, improvement, and responses, including, and Tina Robbins and I just had the pleasure of presenting this nationally, but talking specifically about our collaborative responses during the children's behavioral health crisis. And that was around COVID and natural disasters and just the elevated knowledge of what's happening with our youth and families. But so we've been on top of that. But as a reminder, the system of care approach consists of 3 necessary elements. And that was on the poster that was shown just a minute ago. And those elements are the philosophical framework. So the definition, core values, and guiding principles that you all are really familiar with. The second element is infrastructure, and that has several elements under it. So governance, and that's what I'm going to talk mostly about, but also planning and development, policy development and priorities, shared financing, workforce development, and those kind of things that are needed to keep things moving. And then the third necessary element of a system of care is effective services and supports. And the SEAC and REACTs aren't as involved at that level anymore as they used to be at the individual family and child level, but they are certainly important partners in identifying service needs and developing those new services and supports equitably. So, like Kelly mentioned, Kentucky has been fortunate to have our statutorily created governing bodies in place since 1990. And for those that are still shocked by this, that's over 30 years ago. Like, to me, that was about 2 weeks ago. So, I'm still in the grunge phase. I can't move past it. But that's a long time. And as Kelly mentioned, and Lee and Vanessa say all the time, many states don't have that yet. So our SEAC, our State Interagency Council, and our Regional Interagency Councils, or SEAC and REACTs, have been in state law since 1990, with changes and additions made over time to reflect the growth and changing priorities, or expanding priorities more than changing. So these bodies, as you all know, are responsible for expanding, improving, and sustaining the system of care. The regional interagency councils that I think most of you all are a part of mirrors the state required membership and is also flexible enough that it allows the REACs themselves to identify additional members, voting members. SEAC can't add voting members without opening a statute and going through that whole process of changing legislation. So it's a lot more flexible on the regional level, and that's intentional because you all are in touch with what's going on. If you want to add someone as a voting member, you don't need to wait through that lengthy legislative process. So that's really important that we keep that in place. And you all know the needs of the individuals, families, your communities, and your regions, and are able to make decisions and changes much more rapidly than a state level body. Y'all can gather data and review that effectively. So I think just being aware of those elements and the framework, and we operationalize those really well in Kentucky. In other words, we do the things I just said to keep that system of care framework intact, keep that at the forefront of everybody's mind. I love that the multiple agencies represented here in our governing bodies are really starting to use the system of care language in the same way. For a long time, we've talked about there's a mental health system of care, there's an education system of care, there's a child welfare system of care, there's a recovery system of care. There's a system of care, and everybody has a place within that and has a role within that. We don't need multiple systems of care. So I think that's one area that Kentucky has really had a lot of growth in the last few years, is really having that shared language and not just using the words, but using them in the same way.
Thank you. And I did forget to ask you to introduce yourself. We're
I-
just so used to like knowing who we are.
I know, thank you. And I didn't think to do that either. So I'm Beth Jordan. I'm the program manager for the Children's Mental Health and Recovery Services branch in the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, or BDID. And as also Kelly pretty much said it, I've worked on all 6 of Kentucky's system of care grants. I've been in children's mental health for over 25 years, a long time. I've been at the state for 26 years, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you amazing people.
I think you did obviously a very good job talking about the regional, and I think you tied the state level system of care in there pretty well. So if you're okay, we'll go ahead and do the next question. Is that all right? We talk a lot about who needs to be at the table, and we know from Kentucky statutes that govern SEAC and REACs that several agencies are mandated, as you said. And of course, REACs have the option to add members outside of those that are mandated. And that is a really good point, that REACs know what their community culture is, and you may want other people at the table and need other people at the table. So that I'm glad you highlighted that. How do we support buy-in from the various agencies?
That's a great question, and one that comes up all the time. And there's a lot of ways to do that. I think one simple thing that we might have done, and I'm not sure, is to have like a short standard description of REAC and how it functions, what it supports, what its activities are in the membership, to serve as an introduction to potential new members who may not have ever heard of it. You don't want to get too in the weeds because then people can kind of tune out. But then I think equally important is the ability to articulate to potential new members how REACT can support their mission. Because if they can't figure out what's in it for them or how their work benefits from it, they may show up for a meeting or 2, but they're probably not going to stay for the long haul. So, after you do your little blurb, I hate to say elevator speech because that seems to have resurfaced as a buzzword these days. You know how I feel about buzzwords. But ask them to talk about what they do in the community, their strengths and projects of interest or areas for growth. And this can be an individual that's interested or an agency, any community partner. And then use that information to talk to them in more depth about Kentucky's system of care and what REAC and SEAC have to offer them and what they can also offer back in turn. And then one thing we did with the previous system of care grant is use some of this information based on partners' input to develop little, I don't want to say bench cards because that's very courtish, but little short what's in it for you documents, like one for education, one for DJJ, one for families, all the agency partners. And this not only helps them see what's in it for them, but they can take that back to their agencies and share it with their higher ups and really stress the importance of participation on REACs and support of REACs. And then, of course, cultivating a system of care and REAC champions in the community and within specific agencies. And all this is based on building and maintaining positive collaborative relationships with regional partners.
Awesome. I really like that you're giving very concrete examples. I think that helps everybody to understand that there are steps they can take. And I know Vanessa and Lee especially have done an amazing job with giving some consistency to REACs and with that
Absolutely.
language. But it's good for people to understand what can they bring to the table and the why behind it. Like I don't know that we always as a system do a great job of saying why this is important and what do they want from it. And we've talked about Kentucky's fortunate to be steps ahead of other states with system of care infrastructure at both the state and regional level. And Beth, in your opinion, what's the best way to inform, educate, and promote participation on both SEAC and REACs?
I seem to be missing that question. But to promote participation, I think building on what I talked about for raising awareness, invite people to come and participate, observe, be kind of casual members, if you will, so they can feel more comfortable with it, maybe pair them with someone with similar interests. So they, much like we would support a new youth and family rep, debrief afterwards, ask if they could identify specific things that they heard that their agency or they themselves could bring to the table, and just really continue to support the shared understanding of how it's all building together to improve the communities. And I had the sort of thought of, think of it as a community level wraparound team. So on a wraparound team, everybody's there to support the family, and they each have a different role, and they're all important, and they all support each other. So a REAC is sort of like a regional, more system level wraparound team. It's not looking at individual families and children's needs anymore, and trying to resolve those, but it's looking at the community needs.
I like that. It takes that philosophy, like you just said, of wraparound, but making sure that we keep the family and youth, because not only do we use the words family and youth guided, but we want to make sure that the family and youth, because they're the experts on themselves, they know what they need, they know what they're struggling with, and we as systems and agencies need to support that. So I really like that you tied that together with that kind of that visual and something else people may be familiar with. Thank you,
We
Beth. I
usually
appreciate
say
it.
it in a
Anything else?
different way. Like we usually say wraparound is the operationalization of the system of care at the individual level, but I think flipping it is important too.
Nice. All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
And now we're going to hear from Carly, who is our youth rep. Hi, Carly. How are you?
Hello.
Thanks for joining us today. Would you like to introduce yourself and then we can jump into questions?
I'm Carla Marino, and I'm the youth representative for Big Sandy REAC, and I attend Prestonsburg High School, and I'm a senior.
Congratulations, senior year. The National System of Care philosophy includes core values and guiding principles that should guide the development, implementation, expansion, and evaluation of the regional and state system of care. One of those core values is the system of care should be youth and family driven, with families and youth supported in determining the types of treatment and supports provided, and their involvement in decision-making roles and system-level policies, procedures, and priorities. As a youth representative on one of Kentucky's REACs, what do you feel that is going really well?
I feel like my REACT, they listen to my opinions and they pursue them and they make something out of them. Also feel like we have a lot of community support and a lot of different people each meeting. It's not the same people every single time. And my REACT gave me the opportunity to participate in a youth cohort, and they look forward to building our community in Prestonsburg.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a very good positive. From your perspective, are there things that really need to be done differently to support youth as stakeholders?
I feel like my REACT does their best to support me and to do a good job, making me feel like I do a good job. And they educate me on the system of care processing, and they encourage me to keep building on what I'm doing.
That's great. Can you give any kind of concrete examples of some ways that they've supported you as an individual?
Last year, whenever the flooding happened in Floyd County, I had the idea of doing laundry days every single month or so, and it started just from doing it in Floyd County, and now they've expanded them to Johnson County, and I think they were doing some in Pike County.
Wow, that's a great example. Go ahead.
It's also all 5 counties. I was just informed.
You're having more of an impact than you even realized. Are there some other things that you think that from people from various agencies in your perspective as being involved in the system of care as a youth representative that other agencies could maybe learn to support youth involved in their systems?
I feel like with our with Big Sandy React, I feel like they value my opinion a lot more than some other agencies or stuff that I've heard from my peers and people that kind of hold the same job as I do. I feel like they could just, and rather than just having them be like hold a title or hold their name, I feel like they could do more to pursue their ideas like mine does.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Nope.
Just want to give you that opportunity. And now we're going to go to Cassidy, who's one of our youth supporters. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. So, hey, everybody. My name is Cassidy Denny, and I'm the site manager of a youth drop-in center called The Zone. I'm in Paducah, Kentucky. I work with Four Rivers Behavioral Health. But yeah, that's about it. That's me.
Well, thanks for being here. One of the things that we encourage across the state is ensuring that our youth and parent reps that serve on REACTS and CX have access to others with lived experience to support them with becoming advocates. Can you talk about the importance of connecting youth with systemic care partners to support them with using their voice, like Carly just said, to promote better outcomes for youth and families?
Yeah, absolutely. That is such an important part. Partnering them with someone who can actually like sit down with them. And what we have done in the past in the Jackson Purchase REACT has sat with them. We have a youth coordinator here that actually works in the drop-in center with us, and he will pull the youth representative aside and go over the agenda that we're going to be talking about, because sometimes we have learned like there are a lot of acronyms, there are a lot of scary words, you know, things that people like that haven't been in the system or haven't worked around it for 20 something years have no idea about. And they don't know where we're coming from. They don't know the history of it. So sitting down and going over like what the agenda is and what we're actually talking about, breaking down those acronyms that they've heard in prior meetings or other things like that, that is so important. Because if you walk into somewhere and you feel like, oh, well, I have no idea what they're talking about, or I feel like they're talking at me and they're not talking with me, who's going to want to come back, right? So
Absolutely.
sitting down with them and going over like that agenda and then debriefing afterwards is so important, because even if they don't feel comfortable speaking up within those meetings, you actually have someone to advocate on their behalf. So in the next meeting, you can, you know, give them a gentle push to voice their opinion, or that you can be their voice for them. So that way there's not something that's missed, or they feel like they are a part of the conversation, and then that they can actually contribute to the conversation, because the youth voice is so important. They need a place at the table because they are a part of the table.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Those are great examples. And you kind of already jumped into kind of what does this look like, because you just said that very well. But can you talk a little bit more about, so you debrief, but I think it's important that you just said like, then for the next meeting, because they've had that prep and they've had that education and they've had that time to ask kind of directly in a comfortable place, what did this mean, or what was the point of that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I really appreciate that you gave that example. But then sometimes people do need to just, I don't know, nudge is the right word, or just, I'm not sure, but just to say,
Right.
we want to hear from you. And so they know that's going to come. They know they're going to be asked. That prep's important. Is there anything else that you can think about that, like, to really be a good, strong youth and even parent support?
Yeah. Just to empower them and make them feel like, you know, and because they're a huge part. So to make them feel like, and to empower them to use their voice in something that could create change in their own community, that is like a very, very important piece. And even like with our youth coordinator that sits down and talks with our REACT youth representative, he like has, I know this is the next question, but I'm gonna stick to this question. He debriefs with them, and he is an important tool too, because not only like if they don't feel comfortable like speaking in the meeting, like he can help them have a slot on the agenda just dedicated to them, or he can, you know, break down those terms and all that different stuff. So, and even if you don't have like a quote unquote person that is dedicated like a youth coordinator to show up to the REACT meetings, you can create that person for your REACT. You can dedicate somebody in an agency that works with youth, or somebody that doesn't, and just has like a passion to sit with the youth, you know, and just dedicate one person to sit with them, to empower them, and to have that confidant and that working relationship with them.
I'm really glad you pointed out that it could just be anybody that's comfortable and wants to have that role to support that youth, that it doesn't have to be like an assigned task that if you don't have this role, then you can't provide that service and that support. So I'm really
Right.
glad you pointed out. And again, it's like working to people's strengths. So if you have that person who wants to support that youth, you give them that opportunity, and it's a win-win for both people. So I'm glad you said it that way.
And
Is there
everybody
anything
can be a part of the table too, you know, like everybody can be a part of the table. It doesn't just have to be one person. Like it can be a whole team of people, and like the whole REAC as a whole can support that youth in a way that, you know, they feel comfortable and they feel empowered. So
Absolutely. And setting that culture that
Yeah.
not only is everybody's voice important, but that we really want people to have the opportunity to speak and share their experience, and the youth gets and needs to have that support too. So I really, it goes back to the whole wraparound that we're all a team working together to make things better. So
Yep.
Thank you. Now we're going to jump to Department for Community-Based Services. Tiffany, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So, hi everyone. I think I got to meet several of you last month, or maybe around 6 weeks ago. Time's flying. But when myself and my wonderful colleague Melinda Weiss started talking about the CQI role, and I'll definitely define that more in our work with REAC. So, my name's Tiffany, and I work for the Department for Community-Based Services. I'm a 22-year career veteran with the state. Started my work in frontline work, knocking on doors, working in a lot of the very communities that we all serve together now. And then worked a couple of different roles there. If I can ever be a resource for you, I did several years working with adoption and foster care. And then also some of our higher risk types of investigations, human trafficking, sex abuse, fatalities. So fast forward a little bit. So first of all, I'm from Northern Kentucky. I live in Northern Kentucky. And I served as our REAC chair as well as a clinical associate in Northern Bluegrass. So it's wonderful that I get to work so closely again with the REAC community. I'm actually super excited to be able to do things like this today. It's near and dear to my heart. Love how much REAC has grown, by the way. So currently today, one of my roles, so my role is assistant director. That means a whole lot of nothing when you try to explain to people what it is that you do. So let me make that more tangible to our friends on here. So what I do now is I work really close with what we call our service regions, who you all work alongside in your work on the REACs directly. So one of my primary roles is to make sure that all of this good information, this amazing work that we're doing, makes its way into actual practice at that frontline level. So I work closely with our 9 service regions across Kentucky. And if I can ever be of service to you, specifically in the areas of central intake, so our statewide abuse and neglect reporting system, please reach out. I oversee that branch. Anything regarding safety in our workplaces with our clientele as well as our employees, happy to help with that as well. And then what I'm here to talk mostly with you all today about is our CQI, our continuous quality improvement. We call that field quality. You'll hear me say CQI a lot. So that's what I'm going to actually spend, I think, most of my time talking about today. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Tiffany. DCPS has been a long-standing mandated member of both the state and regional system of care bodies, the SEAC and REAC. Most recently, DCPS has taken their collaborative efforts to the next level by assisting with needed data, making connections, and supporting community needs, which is something we hope other agencies will be able to do. Can you talk about the intentional work being done with DCPS to support this partnership with REACs?
Yes, thank you. So I actually am going to do one of the things I love to be able to do when really brilliant people say things. I write it down and I copy it. And Beth, actually, you're helping me out with kind of my intro today on that. So Beth earlier said part of what REAC does, part of the call, right, the mission, and I'm going to chop this up, I'm sure some, Beth, but essentially what I heard her say was changing, expanding, improving, and sustaining a system of care. That is such a perfect segue as I answer the question that Kelly's posing. So it's a perfect segue into that continuous quality improvement CQI role. To begin, DCPS shares absolutely and wholeheartedly the same goal that we've heard about system of care, and even more specifically to the regional interagency councils, of increasing engagement with our stakeholders. So one of the goals that Kentucky certainly also agrees with and is trying to actually improve, to be quite honest with you all, is also part of our Kentucky Federal Child and Services Plan, which is to increase stakeholder engagement. More specifically, and I won't go into all the details of that because we're here to have a lot, I think, more robust conversation that feels really tangible to REACTS. But one of our specific goals in our program improvement plan, so something Kentucky needs to do better on, is to increase stakeholder engagement by 10% within the next fiscal year. We're well underway to doing that. What we needed to do better in, as far as a CQI structure, was to document and track that. And actually the REACTS allow us the opportunity to try to start doing some of that. So ultimately, though, more poignantly with the question Kelly's posing is how we're layering that up, right, in our CQI structure. So we want to build collaboration and partnership in that same culture of CQI, very much so mirrors the system of care values and mission. We want to decrease the siloed work, right? We all kind of get into our game, the workday starts, suddenly we find ourselves trying to take on the world alone. System of care reminds us, right, not to do that we have lots of partners in the work, and not that we just have them, but we need to depend on the relationship of the work. CQI has that same mentality. One of the things also where we want to insert more of our CQI work together, and I'll start defining that a little bit more for you all, but is to bridge those service gaps, and then of course to share and strengthen in the important work at a community level. So Kelly had asked the question about a layered approach of CQI and what DCBS has been doing in that longstanding relationship. So let me first just define CQI very broadly, just so we're all on the same page. So when we define CQI at the DCBS level, we're talking about safety, permanency, and well-being. I know that everybody on here has probably heard those three terms before, but we like to kind of funnel that a little bit more so that we focus our efforts together. So what we've started doing, and I'm so excited, we've really just started kicking this off about 2 months ago with our REACT partners, is that our CQI specialist, so what those folks help to really analyze and share data across the service regions. Every single service region, and I know REACT and service regions don't mirror each other perfectly, but don't worry, we've got that figured out too, because we definitely have a dedicated CQI specialist for every REACT service region. And so those CQI specialists will actually come to every REACT meeting alongside their DCBS counterpart. So you'll still get to know and love on your DCBS representatives that have been coming to those meetings, but also they're going to be supported by the CQI specialist. Those specialists are specially trained in being able to analyze and help share data. That is brilliant. So when I use the word data, because I'm not naturally data gifted, I like to say I'm data informed, and I'm data taking training every day, to keep it really simple here. But what that means is families, right? So when we talk about data, I actually prefer to talk about that in terms of families and kiddos. So CQI specialists are able to, one, deliver on your service request. When you say, hey, in Salt River Trail, we're really getting concerned with the amount of kids coming into a system that maybe have a specific disability that we're not really sure how we're going to do well by them. That's important, right? So let's look at what the numbers actually say about that. How can we be really informed? And then maybe that's part of the action planning, right? Or maybe at least help shore up some answers. So they're able to do that. They're able to help with those service requests. And even better yet, they're able to help analyze that along with the DCBS staff that comes. So that's who CQI specialists are. Some of the things that we've talked about, and I'll tell you how we've gotten to this answer as well, but some of the things that we've come up with CQI specialists being able to do to help support the work of REACT and to also support their DCBS counterpart is sharing and discussing whatever's on the table, right? Whatever's on those agendas, being informed, being prepared when they come there to talk about those data discussions, and through regular data discussion, right? We don't want that to feel like a one and done. We've all been a part of things where you get the data, you're glad to have it, but you're kind of overwhelmed by it, right? Every day. So how do we make that come alive, right? How do we make that tangible? So that's part of what they're really working hard at doing in conjunction with the entire REACT community, and really what REACTs need from us and not the other way around. As I've said, co-partnering with their DCBS counterpart. Quick note about that as well. Vanessa and Lee are wonderful stewards of the work. We've shared with them a directory. So one thing, and just to be really tangible here, right, because you got to be able to do the work and have some currency. So we made sure that every REACT was covered by current tangible DCBS staff. So we got that done. We've got a nice updated directory of that so that you all know who the counterparts are, as well as who the CQI specialist is that also serves in that capacity. So we have a nice updated directory on that. One of the other things that we've started working on together in that layered approach is, when we were talking to our REACT partners, we discovered that training was a need, right? We all know, a lot of us here know what REACT does, what system of care means, or at least kind of on a high level. But what we were honestly discovering when we talked to our staff is sometimes people are asked to attend a meeting. Maybe some of us have been in this boat, and you nod your head and you're good stewards and you're good volunteers. And then you go and you're like, I don't know what the heck I'm supposed to be doing at this meeting. Well, that was happening, to be really honest, right? That was happening, especially in this little thing we call a pandemic that we all survived together. Kudos to us. But we know staffing changed a lot during that time. So during that time also, what happened is folks were asked to attend some meetings that maybe weren't as invested or understood or even given the tools to really come in good and prepared, right? So what we've discovered is REACT has an amazing training program, by the way. You all have put together a PowerPoint and some other materials. Beth referenced that summary of REACT earlier. We took all of that, we stole all of that, quite honestly, from the good folks here at REACT and the system of care, with permission from the folks doing it. And we've brought that over into our system, what we call a TRIS system. It's a training system, so that our DCBS folks now will be required to take the training. They were always encouraged before, now they're required. And it will also be tracked in our TRIS training system, which means they get training credit for it. So we will actually be ready. This will also be news to Lee and Vanessa, but we're going to be ready to roll that out in January. That'll all be live and active where that training credit is awarded. So that's another, just a little perk, a little extra way that we're able to kind of say as an agency, this is important. We value this with our REACT partners. And so we were able to do that as well on that training piece. And again, more closer to the point, our staff also said they felt they needed a little bit more of that. So I think that's going to make for a better community partner experience for everybody. I talked a little bit about specific data requests. So one thing that we're working on, DCBS and again, REACT, we met and asked some questions of your REACT chairs and leads. Likewise, we asked those same exact questions to our DCBS representatives. And what we asked was, what's going well, right? What's going well with the REACTs? If we have a little time, I'll show you a quick word poll of what is going well, because I think it's a beautiful piece of art, to be really honest with you, that really shows the great work that is going on between REACTs and DCBS. And I think it's important to remember that, right? Every time we talk about improvement, I never want to become blind to the fact that good things are happening all along the way as well. So certainly lots of great stuff coming in terms of a wide range. I'll tell you the trend there was, of course, the partnership and collaboration in the work. So we also asked, of course, adversely, the same question of both our REACT leads and our DCBS leads. You know, what do we need to do better in? So we heard a lot of good information about that as well. Something we heard very loud and clear from our REACT partners was the data piece, which we are really hopeful, right? The CQI specialist being in that seat will directly help improve. So one thing that we're working on is trying to get together a data set that will be easily shareable, right? It'll just be something we simply have for our community partners, REACT, as well as others. That isn't something we have to constantly vet through, right? We have a vetting system, I'm sure you all do too in your respective agencies, to make sure that that data is not only legitimate and faithful to how it's actually been pulled, but that the analysis isn't going to confuse anybody. It doesn't look like one piece of data says something different than another. All of those are great operations, right? You have to have that structure in place, but we want to have something very readily available, right? When you need something today, we want to be able to deliver that pretty close to form of the time that you're asking. So what we did was we took in all of those requests from REACTs to say, what is it that folks really want? Just to give you a taste of that today, it's things like, why are kids coming into out-of-home care from my community? By the way, I love that REACT said that, because what that says is, we don't want kids to leave our community, right? We know that's a resource, that's a commodity here. When kids leave the community, we all lose. And so I loved hearing that, to be honest with you, as a career social worker. So we know you want to know, why the heck are kids coming out of my community? What don't we have that they need? That's what that says. So we want to get data together for that. You'll see some of that in the form of the facts reports that some of you are used to seeing, but a little more embellished with what the actual REACT request is. We also heard a lot about disabilities. I always love learning something new. That was sort of it was interesting for me to hear that. So folks also are worried about kids not only coming into out-of-home care, but entering the child welfare system at all, and also having some high acuity needs, or some, more specifically, several folks actually said physical and mental disabilities. So we want to pull some data on that for our REACTs that is easily transferable. And then sadly but true, we know we're still battling a very huge epidemic regarding substance misuse and co-occurring mental health disorders. So that was also part of that data set request. when there are more specific requests to a community, maybe, I know, I think Miss Carly mentioned earlier, Floyd County and the flooding, maybe there was a specific request there. Maybe Carly would have been interested in data about households that had the ability to have, certain household needs met, like the laundry situation, right? So what great data, for Carly in that region to have their hands on. Hey, how many households have access to certain utilities? How many households are in maybe apartment type settings or household type settings without washers and dryers? So those are things that we may not be able to get right to that specific data request, but something closer to, or maybe looking at levels of poverty and DCBS. So those can always also be vetted up as separate requests, and the CQI specialist will be your right-hand men and women to do that as well. Bringing back information in that feedback loop. And Kelly, you yell at me if I get too long, because it's easy for me to do that when I'm excited. Okay, I'm going to keep going until you yell at me.
Okay.
So the other thing I want to say about information. So the idea between the specialist or anybody ever that's representing DCBS with any community partner, and definitely our REACT partners, is that needs to be a flow, right, back and forth. I said earlier, part of our Child and Family Services federal plan was to increase engagement. Note, I did not say that's to increase DCBS telling the community what we have and maybe what our ideas are, although that's great to share. We need that to be a two-way flow, right? Engagement actually means somebody's there working together with you on the problem, not one entity saying, hey, I've got this really great idea and let's make it rock and roll. Lots of great ideas have happened that way. Lots of good work across our state have happened that way, but probably not the best work, to be really honest, right?
Mhm.
That's why we need those wonderful voices of folks with living experience, our community partners who are doing the work every day, right, to help engage that. So we really want to build that culture of engagement as well with this process of the data sharing. Something else that we have in terms of that layered response with CQI specialists and a CQI lens, we have a survey, and I'm always careful. I'm a little nervous when I mention surveys, because I know that in a post-pandemic world, we've all started getting used to the idea of virtual meetings and surveys. Wonderful way to get information, but I also respect that a lot of us are a little surveyed out. But we do have a survey that we tried to keep pretty small. But the reason I bring this particular survey up is our CQI specialists will share this in the REACT meetings. Again, the community group there, the REACT groups can say, hey, we only want to see this survey quarterly. We only want to see it once a year, because we don't want to survey. We don't want to have anybody have death by survey, right? So, but this survey is unique because what happens is we're asked, it's completely about engagement. And I'm happy to share the link, but I'll let Vanessa and Leah tell me if they want me to do that or not. But the survey basically asks, is DCBS partnering well with you? Are your community partners partnering well with you? Where do we need to get better? Where do we feel like we got it and we can move on? It also just very simply asks a question of what else does somebody want to see on this particular meeting, right? What other topics are helpful? What's interesting about this particular survey, and the part that I love to talk about when I use the S word, when I use the survey word, is it's shareable to both parties. So whoever the host of the meeting is, and we share this widely. So it's a generic survey that's not just for REACTs, it's not just for courts, it's not just for our educators, it's for any meeting that you essentially have, even your own staff meetings. What happens is DCBS gets all those survey poll responses back, and then we share it right back to the host. So it's not a saying, hey, will you let your people take the survey for us? It's, hey, we're actually going to go ahead and make sure that you also have these results. You get a little what's in it for me, right? To thank you for even allowing us to share that survey. You're going to see all those results as well. So just wanted to also talk about that. We've already been utilizing that across our CQI forum in the state to help improve our engagement with our partners as well. What areas. The other thing I failed to say about that particular survey is it breaks it down by you being able to tell us which county. It goes down to the county level that you serve and work in. Okay, I think I've talked to you about pretty much the feedback we got from REACTs and the communities. I think, Kelly, that's probably enough of me answering that particular question, but I think we're good there.
Well, Tiffany, I very much appreciate your passion and your very helpful information. And you kind of talked about how does the work you're doing support DCBS back? Like that reciprocity you mentioned, that we are all in this together. We're in it for the families and children. We're in it because we care. Can you talk a little bit more about how like DCS is benefiting from being involved with REACT and your support of them being more informed and educated about what REACT can do.
Yes, and I'll try to keep this a little more brief, but just because it's a very simple answer and I could keep it that way to say, DCBS benefits 200% of what REACT shares back with us. We are well aware that our families know their families the best. I want to live and work in a community where when I have access services and when I assuredly will need to access services in the future, that my community says, gosh, I know Tiffany Mullis knows her kids the best. I know Tiffany Mullis knows her family the best. I really hope I get to live and work in a community that does that and embraces that. And DCBS knows that's what's best for our families, right? That sometimes the families that we serve, despite, you know, I talk a lot with my own employees and colleagues that, and, you know, I shared with you all earlier that I oversee our central intake reporting. In the work that we've chosen to do, in the public service that all of us have probably chosen to do in some way on here, we don't always get these calls. In fact, I never get the calls that say, I want to tell you how healthy my child is, and I want to tell you how well our family's doing, and I want to tell you that everything is just wonderful. I shouldn't say I never get to hear that. Sometimes I get to hear that. But that's just not the nature of kind of what we're here, that what we're called to serve in some of the roles that I play. And so knowing that we don't always get to see families on their best day, I never want to forget the importance of community wrapping around. I never want to forget, gosh, on my worst day, I hope somebody doesn't judge me and has a service available for me and says, hey, we're here to help, and not all the other things that could be said, right? So in the spirit of that, when we talk about how does DCBS benefit from that, it's remembering that lens always, right? It's remembering that lens when we're tired, when things are really hard, when we don't have all of the services or providers or staff that we need, when we're sitting in offices with kids because we don't have the best placement for them, right? These are all real things. I hope I don't forget that lens. And to me, that's what REACT offers right back to DCBS is they say, hey, at the community, by the way, y'all up here making some governmental decisions, by the way, please remember, here's what we're seeing in our communities. And that is so invaluable. Engagement. So the benefit for certainly DCBS is certainly the community partner engagement. We're all well aware that this cannot be done. I said it earlier, in a silo. It should not be done in a silo. I can't tell you how many times in a week, and I'm betting that you all have seen this as well. We're all working so hard, and I think we forget sometimes that folks are doing partner work and collaborative work. And so we've done all of this work and we get really exhausted. And then we find out a community partner maybe could have been part of that with us and maybe eased a little bit of that, right? And just building that network that honestly is the whole point of a system of care. The other, I think, huge benefit of specifically adding those CQI specialists to the REACT meetings, again, is that shared two-way communication over program improvement, learning, right? It's so invaluable to get out into the communities and learn what's going on there. We then, by the way, something very tangible I should mention is at DCBS, we have something called a CQI collaborative. What that is any statewide CQI issues, or maybe it's a problem that we're really struggling with trying to get some kind of resolve or improvement on, those are brought back to a statewide meeting on a monthly basis that we call a CQI collaborative. That collaborative houses every division, has representation from every division in the entire Cabinet for Health and Family Services. So all of CHFS is represented at that collaborative. And what that means, not that everybody's figuring everything out, I'm not silly enough to believe that, okay, without the work of a broader group. But what that does mean is that group can then hear that and share it back to all of their constituents, colleagues, employees. So you have broader information sharing. So for example, our staff are going to the REACT meetings and they hear about a new service. They're bringing that back. We're sharing that on a statewide level. Then you got some communication and sharing out, right? You don't want to go somewhere and keep it all to yourself, right? I might know all these great resources. Hooray for me. Doesn't do anybody a lot of good unless I'm sharing that with some other people. So that's one of the purposes and intents we have of our CQI specialists. They bring it back to our team meeting on a branch. We bring it on up to that statewide level. And then the only other thing I think, Kelly, that I would like to mention in terms of, again, mutual benefit really, but sharing the trends and shifts that we also see in the work. That was actually a specific request, and I thought a brilliant one from one of the REACT chairs, by the way, asking about specific data sets around when you see shifts in the trend, right? Shifts in the trend of any part of this work, that's really important to hear, right? And what we do is sometimes we assume the other guy's telling somebody, right? Like I know I do that sometimes. I'll hear something, go, gosh, that sounds really important and sounds like really hard to explain to another person. But if I know that, it doesn't hurt to share that out, especially when it's trend data, especially on a statewide level, but even in a region-wide level. But that's another certainly a win that DCBS knows we're getting from our system of care partners. And then again, we can share back out on a broader community level.
Thank you, Tiffany. That was really, really helpful information. And I really like how strength-based that was. People have teased me over the years because I wholeheartedly to 100% believe everybody has strengths. Every system has strengths. Every agency has strengths. And sometimes we forget to celebrate the things that actually are going really well. And like the examples you gave of CQRS specialists, which seems like maybe a smaller thing, but like it brings the data, it brings those relationships, it enhances all of the things that we are strive for with our connection. So I appreciate that. Now we're going to go to Michelle Cunningham. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you. I'm Michelle Cunningham. I am the local resource coordinator for the Jefferson County and the Salt River Trail Regional Interagency Councils. And I've actually had, hate to say, 27 years experience working in actual system of cares. I started out in the juvenile justice system, went into the healthcare realm, then went into special needs and education, and landed in behavioral health. So working as a collaborative amongst the system of care, I've been able to have a different lens as far as working with community partners and having insight. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, thank you. As the local resource coordinator of 2 REACTs, how do you garner support for your REACT's regional system of care efforts? How do you get people to the table and how do you get them to participate?
So I know in our region, it's a little bit different. I have the flexibility and the ability to solely be staffed to our REAC. I know some of our REACs don't have that ability, but for me, talking specifically, I'm actually where people are. So if the grassroots are holding meetings within the community settings, I show up there. If faith-based, organizations are having council meetings or collaborative events, I show up there. Outside of just your typical DCBS, educational systems, court systems, where multiple of our system of care partners or members are actually attending multiple meetings, I have to try to think of outside the box because these are individuals who are actually servicing our children and our families. So I try to show up at where those opportunities might be and listen to specifically what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and then invite them into the space to have collaboration and conversations with other entities and agencies who are actually servicing those children and family, and then share what the system of care is and what their role could be in sharing the information that they might be talking about or collaborating with in a smaller area, bringing that more, because if they're seeing it, then it may be more of a global situation across the state or within other areas and counties. So just having conversations within the settings that they might be actually in, and then trying to educate what their role within the system of care might look like.
So it sounds like you're very intentional with your outreach. Yes. So when they do attend, are there certain strategies, kind of like Cassidy said, to like bring that culture of we want you to participate, we want you to have share your voice?
Yeah.
So things you do for that strategy.
Yeah. So I try to have conversations with what they're seeing, what seems to be a need, what is the trends, what's the population look like, have a real in-depth conversation of, and be, what you mentioned as far as intentional, as far as what impact our REAC could have. And then when they come to the REAC, can kind of explain, here's what you could present on, or here's what we could support. Here's how, the REAC members, could best serve, that family, or what's missing. Sometimes we're doing it really well and we're all collaborating together and, the systems work, you know, flawlessly. And then there's other times that there's barriers, or there might be, you know, challenges, and maybe bringing them to a conversation where they can have, you know, maybe some resolution to whatever that challenge might look like, or that barrier, because maybe there's a partner there that's off, you know, that's present at the REAC, that can help kind of navigate through whatever that, you know, situation might look like. And I can kind of speak for our Jefferson County. We have incidences where there's not been a very good positive relationship within the law enforcement capacity. And we had intentional conversations with partners through the police department, with some of our child serving agencies, so that we could build that relationship with the families, because they've had negative impacts or negative experiences. So to help build some of that relationship, you know, and conversations. So we had, you know, outside of our meetings, we were able to connect with certain representatives within the department, who then started going out into the community events, started, you know, within themselves, started, you know, fundraising to have activities for the children and the youth within the challenged neighborhoods that maybe that they weren't necessarily welcomed in to begin with, to start repairing those relationships, to start building that trust, to start having real hard conversations, to start having an understanding of what maybe the families were actually experiencing, so then they can change their practices and their approaches and their services, and have an understanding, and start building a pathway of, okay, well, what do we need to do next? How can we be of, you know, the best service within your area? And then committees and councils within that neighborhood then were formed. So just from one conversation trickled and had a ripple effect with, okay, well, you know, here's how I can do this. It's not just attending a meeting, it's what are we doing on the back end, you know, as well, as far as the action part. But it stemmed from that initial connection. We have a faith-based group that's specifically, you know, focused around gun violence. And in our particular area in the Jefferson County, that's one of the strongest areas that we focus on. But then they also take it in a whole, you know, different, you know, capacity, not just the family and the children, but they look at it as a community, building community and capacity, and building relationships across different sectors. You know, everybody has a different approach, or, you know, belief, or mindset as far as, you know, how they might see something. And they're able to break that, you know, barrier across all, you know, faith bases. So there's different, and it's not just like our mandated members, it's different members that are able to be represented. So having just conversations with them to kind of see what is important at their level, and then how, like, we as REAC members can best serve them. And then what's that, you know, what's that look like for the agency? So, you know, we might see them in, you know, child services, but they also might be in, you know, the mental hospitals, the child behavioral hospitals, or they might be in the juvenile justice system. So we might be seeing them in different, you know, capacities, but then they also need support. So we could reach out to those grassroots people that aren't typically at these, you know, meetings, these standing meetings across the state, and say, oh, here's this connection. Just for example, like our court designated workers program, you know, we'd mentioned mentorship programs, that it was a need within our area. These kids need to have mentors and peers that can help navigate through, so that they could be successful on diversions. They've since then reached out, and they made that collaboration just off of those conversations, and having, you know, outreach to entities that maybe aren't typically at meetings that we see on a regular basis. So it creates ripple effects then that has like a buy-in for them to continue to keep showing up and having conversations.
Those are great examples of some of the successes you all have definitely seen. And I really like the emphasis on, we do sometimes tend to see the same people at the table, and it's really important in our communities to do that intentional outreach that Michelle referenced, to bring other people to the table, because there is a whole lot of people out there who care and who want to be helpful, and maybe they don't know how to tap into the infrastructure that we have. And that outreach can be incredibly important. So thank you, Michelle. Are there any barriers that your REACs have encountered along the way when trying to build that collaboration, and how did you address it? Or how did they address it?
Yeah, so typically, and I know that we hear this a lot of, like, when we schedule meetings, oh, it's not like, you know, the best ideal, or I have a meeting that's, you know, at the same time as that, or I have another commitment and I can't get to those. So just like that, when we're doing outreach or we're attending events, you know, people are double booked, or people are stretched thin, or people have other commitments or obligations. So one of the things that I have ran into when talking to people, like, oh, I really wished I could, share that, at your REAC, or I really wish I could talk about that, or I could, come to hear about that, but it, coincides with maybe something else that's going on. So when I kept hearing that over and over again, I was very intentional about making sure that I was able to schedule time that I could then go to them, where I'm having those conversations, or like somebody from like our REAC was able to like meet with them outside of like our typical REAC meetings to get the information. So it's not just like, oh, okay, well, they can't come, so they can't come, that their input's not, valued. It's very intentional that we still have that partnership. They may not show up to the REAC meeting, but we're still having meetings with them outside of that REAC meeting. We're still collaborating with them, and we're still gathering the information that they want to share. And then we report that information back out to the members who are able to actually come to the meeting, because it's still information that everybody else needs to hear and be able to share on, and then still continue that relationship. So this way that they're still feeling valued, that they're, whether it be suggestions, whether it be, a need that they had, been identified, whether it be something that they're working on, whether it's an event that's coming up that they need partnership with, whatever it might look like, that they still have that representation at a REAC meeting. They just maybe not, that they're not there themselves. So we've been able to like be intentional about still having those voices and that information at our meetings. So I would say that's probably the biggest barrier. Is there's a lot of entities that maybe want to be able to attend, but their schedules or like the time frames just doesn't allow it. So making sure that you're not just forgetting about that, but you're setting certain, amounts of time to be intentional about that relationship, because you still want to foster that relationship. You still want to have that resource to be able to connect those families too.
Awesome. And that, like you said, the follow through always matters. And it's important for people to know when they reach out that they're heard, and that you do want to engage with them, even if they can't, like I said, fit into the structure. So that's all our questions, for the written pre-prepped questions, but I'm going to challenge the audience. You've heard from several people who have a lot of experience, which I think is a very valuable thing. And a lot of who have a lot of strengths. And we'd love to hear from you all about, do you have questions? Do you have something that is on your mind, that you've heard these things that you want to ask? How do you fit into this wheel, and what do you want to see next steps? So we'd love people to come off mute and ask. I generally call on people. I won't do that today because I don't think I should. But anyway, questions, please. I will call on people. If it gets too quiet, I don't like quiet. Like, I'll call on people. I raised 8 children. I can't do quiet. So who's got some questions for us?
You have to accept the awkward silence. Somebody will speak to fill it.
Are we going to take that that's a bet? Somebody's going to now need to like step in.
I just want to see how great this is, because I don't want to be randomly called on if it gets too quiet. So no, but truly I really appreciate being a part of this today. And I don't know, hearing from every panelist has been, this is just such a great venue, and it's felt very welcoming. So Kelly, seriously, your facilitation has been very, very welcoming and just very easy to kind of vet into. So thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate that. Leah, that's a good point. You can just stop recording, and then people may feel more comfortable jumping in. I know people have ideas about this. Like Vanessa said, this has come up for 2 years. People ask questions. They want to be part. They want to understand the system of care. They want to be able to act on the passion and the caring that they have. So we know that people have questions.